this is a strategy that we use when we have something that does not factor nicely. If you try to do slip and slide and it doesn't work. What we can do in this case is completing the square. So we have to have it set up ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So we need everything on one side equal to 0. We need that first term to be a 1x squared. So if it's any other number, we'll just divide everything by it. So if it's a 3x squared, we start out dividing everything by 3. Then we are going to move the constant to the other side. So we'll have everything with the x on one side and the number on the other. And then we will create a perfect square. So when I say perfect square, think about if I said
49.
What does this factor into? Negative 1 and negative 1. So we can say that's x minus 1 squared. If I said x squared plus 4x plus 4, what does that factor into?
2.
So that's x plus 2 squared. If I said x squared minus 6x plus 9. Okay, so what we're going to do is try to create this thing over here. So you'll notice this number, how is it related to the negative 6? So if you take half of negative 6, that's negative 3, and negative 3 squared is 9. If I take half of 4 is 2, and 2 squared is 4. Half of negative 2 is negative 1, squared is 1. You know, if I said x squared plus 8x, what would this number have to be? 16. And that would be x plus 4 squared. So we have to figure out what this number is to make a perfect square so that we can then factor it and solve. Okay, so here is our first problem. Always check. Just because I'm teaching completing the square today doesn't mean that I might not give you something that could factor nicely. Is there anything that multiplies to negative 14 and adds to negative 4? No, so we can't just factor. So we're going to create a perfect square. We want this to be a 1x squared, and it is. So the next step, we want the x's on one side, and I need my 14 on the other. So I'm going to add this 14 over. So then I need to figure out what should I add right here so this will be a perfect square. And so the pattern we were figuring out is it's always half of this number squared. So negative 4 divided by 2 squared. So negative 4 divided by 2 and negative 2 squared is positive. But in an equation, if we want to keep it balanced, if we do something on one side, we have to do it on the other as well. So if I add 4 on this side, we also add 4 over here. Does everyone see where my 4 came from? So now this should factor. And it should be a perfect square. What multiplies to 4 and adds to negative 4? Negative 2 and negative 2, or I could write it as x minus 2 squared. Okay, 14 plus 4 is 18. Now this is more like a problem I would have given you yesterday. What would you do if you're trying to get x by itself? And when you add a square root, you need? So we have x minus 2 equals plus and minus. How do I break apart 18?
9 and 2, not 9 and 3.
Yeah, sorry. And so then to get x by itself, add our 2. These aren't like terms because this has a radical with it. So I'm just going to leave my answer as 2 plus and minus 3 radical 2.
Do we not put in the solution set?
Yeah, you can write it in solution set. I am not going to count off if you don't. Either way is fine for me.
In anything or on
don't do solution sets.
Here's color. And I can never draw them. They're like 23s.
It's the thought that counts. I know that was a little bit longer than the problems we're used to. Are there any questions here? So let's just try some more. This is what we're doing today, just completing the square. So I'm going to work examples until we've got it. Does this one factor nicely? No, nothing multiplies to -2 and adds to -3. So, has to be a 1x squared, and it is. That means we can set it up for completing the square. So we add over the 2. Okay, how do we find this number that we add on each side?
Divide by 2.
Take this, we need half of that, so divide it by 2 and square it. Okay, -3 divided by 2 does not work out evenly, but what's -3 squared?
Negative 9,000.
9 over 2 squared is 4. Alright, I'm just going to keep it as a fraction instead of changing to a decimal. So it didn't work out nice and pretty, but that's okay. We know that we just made a perfect square, so this should go to something squared. Okay, on the last one it was a little more obvious, but your whatever goes in here is just what that number was before you squared it. So that would be a -3 over 2.
Usually minus 1.
I'm going to prefer you keep the fractions, and you'll understand why in a minute, but
Oh, is it for when we do this?
okay, over here, 2 plus 9 over 4. So that would be like 8 over 4 plus 9 over 4, so 17 over 4. Then what? Square root, plus and minus, bless you. So x minus 3/2 equals plus or minus. I don't know the square root of 17. What is the square root of 4?
2.
That's why it's easier to keep these in fraction in terms of reducing the radical. So final step, we add this 3/2 over, so we get 3/2 plus and minus radical 17 over 2. Typically, when you complete the square, you're mostly going to have radicals in your answer. If you end up with something that doesn't have an imaginary number or a radical, then you probably could have done slip and slide to begin with. But it's not uncommon at all to have those radicals. Questions?
Yeah.
Okay. This does have a GCF. If you want to go ahead and take that out, you can. It will also take care of it in the next step. I told you that when we complete the square, A has to be 1. So if it's not, we have to divide everything by A. So in this case, we have to divide everything by 9. So we get x squared. Let's keep fractions over decimals. So 12 over 9 would reduce to 4 over 3. Anything multiply to 1 and add to -4/3? No. So we have to move the constant over. Alright, so in completing the square, to get this magical number, you take your middle term, divide it by 2, and square it. What is -4/3 divided by 2? negative 2/3. When you square that, negative 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9. So we will add 4 over 9 to each side. So now we should be able to factor. What will this factor into?
Negative 2/3.
squared.
X minus 2/3 squared. And again, easiest place, if you can't figure that out, just look at what was my number before I squared it. Negative 1 plus 4 over 9. So negative 1, that's 9 over 9, plus 4 over 9, and negative 5 over 9. Square root, plus and minus, x minus 2/3 equals plus or minus. What's the square root of negative 5?
Well, there's an I.
You can take out an I, but then we have to leave the square root of 5. What's the square root of 9?
3.
Then find the stuff, add over the 2/3. Can I give you guys a couple to try? Yeah. Since my 8th hour will be cut short today, I'm gonna kind of keep you guys together. Let's do.
Is that gonna be the same as we had last year?
Okay. There's no.
I have no
I'm
idea.
not sure if they're at 8, unless it's at 8 though.
First one.
What are you gonna say before you start the video?
It does not factor nicely, so we have to set up for completing the square. So add over the 6. Then you take your middle term, which is 11, divided by 2, squared. So that gives you 121 over 4. How do you know what this factors into?
11, because you do what you did, divide by 2.
Yeah, when we divided by 2, we had a positive 11 over 2. So this is x plus 11 over 2 squared equals 145 over 4. All right, then we need to square root plus and minus. $145, does that reduce at all? So you have to subtract this over, so negative 11 over 2 plus and minus the square root of 145 over 2. Is that okay? What about the second one? What'd you do?
Well,
Oh.
that's what I was.
Did you guys all catch it?
I didn't.
I mean, I didn't do it without.
I didn't
later.
until the end, whenever you
Uh-huh.
said if it factors perfectly, then it's probably a slip and
I
slide.
Right, you
saw-
could do this with slip and slide. Let's say you didn't catch it and you completed the square. What would you have to do first?
Just divide by 3.
Divide everything by 3
Yeah.
and divide the 2 over. It doesn't really matter which one you do first. So you get x squared plus 5/3 x. Can I go ahead and add the 2/3 over?
That's what I do.
Okay. So middle term was 5/3. I need to divide that by 2 and square it. So that would be 5 over 6 squared. Which is 25 over 36.
Honestly, I should have caught it there, but I didn't.
So, what's this factor into?
X plus 5, 6.
Squared.
Right, over here, this
49,
would be
36.
49 over 36. So now square root plus and minus. Square root of 49 is 7, square root of 36 is 6. So when you bring this over, you have negative 5, 6 plus and minus 7, 6. If you leave your answer like this, I'm going to take off. Why?
Because you can simplify.
Yeah, we can simplify. These are like terms. So this means negative 5, 6 plus 7, 6 and negative 5, 6 minus 7, 6. So negative 5 over 6 plus 7 over 6 would give you 2 over 6 or 1 over 3. This would be negative 12 over 6, which is, is that what you got when you did slip and slide and solved it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Slip and slide's faster, but completing the square always works, regardless of if the original problem was nice or not. Okay, do we need more of these?
Isn't that easy?
Okay, so because my other class is going to be behind, we're going to stop here for today.